We can draw.
Nominate Ben to
Do you accept Ben?
Sure.
All in favor?
I seconded
Aye.
All right, Ben, do you have an agenda in front of you?
I don't. So we do have a forum?
Yes.
All right, so we can move on to matters for the public. Do we have any members of the public who would like to join the committee? Move on to general administration. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second. All right. Do we vote on that? Everybody who says they'd like to approve this agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any additions to the agenda? All right. And then next we're going to move on to the approval of the January 17th meeting minutes. Can I get a motion for that? All right. Second. All right. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Hearing none, we will accept those.
Ben, there's one other matter that, there is, Jawan is on the meeting, he is a voting member, so you will, that are person need to vote to allow him to participate.
For the record, can you tell us where you're reporting from and your general reason so we can put it in the minutes?
In my office over here in Avon. Don't have a good reason.
I said. Everyone's going to vote yay to allow Juan to.
Yay.
Yay. Any nays?
No.
Okay, cool. All right, moving on to our first item, transportation improvement program. Please, that's you, Ryan.
Yes, I'm gonna turn it over to the same staff for.
I'll get you started and then we can have a discussion. So I think most of you have probably been through this process before, but just to provide a little bit of background information. Okay. The tip is really sort of the implementation of the projects that have been identified in the long-range transportation plan. So this is the MPO's opportunity to approve the actual expenditures of funding for projects that have already been identified as priority initiatives. The purpose of the TIP is to schedule the spending of federal transportation funds within the MPO region. So it's a 4-year spending program that's updated it's actually updated every 3 years. So what that means is that we are currently in the fiscal year FY21 to FY24 TIP. And now we're getting ready to approve the FY24 to FY27 TIP. So there's a year of overlap. The schedule of anticipated expenditures are provided to us by the transit agencies. So Don and Kat have provided what they expect their expenditures to be to manage their transit programs. That is our opportunity to review that as an MPO and to say that we approve those expenditures, and then that is passed on to DRPD as a communication of what the transit funding is going to be spent on within our region. And then VDOT provides us the anticipated expenditures for the roadway infrastructure and other surface transportation related projects. That's all based on the formulas that they use to determine what the spending is going to be in different groups, which we'll talk about, as well as any projects that have been approved through the 6-year improvement program. So most of the projects that are called out and referenced specifically have already been approved through another initiative. And so this is showing that those fundings are going to be programmed over the next 4 years. Projects of regional significance are pulled out and shown individually in tip boxes. So I'll show you an example of that in a second. And then projects that have similar funding categories are grouped together. And the reason projects are grouped together is because that gives more flexibility as far as having to make adjustments to divert funds from one project to another within those group fundings in order for the agencies to be efficient in providing maintenance and improvements to the roadway system. So just as an example, these are a couple of tip boxes. You can see that top box is a regionally significant project, which means that there's a specific project description. And so if expenditures are going to be adjusted from one fiscal year to the next, or if that amount is going to be reduced or increased for any reason, that is going to be specifically communicated related to that project. Whereas the bottom table shows an example of a group project. So it's a general category of maintenance and preventative system preservation. So that's just one example. And so this is going to contain that kind of funding for any number of projects. And this gives the state and VDOT some opportunities to move projects around or move funding around from one project to another, as long as it's all within that group. You all received a copy of the draft transportation improvement program in your packets. Ryan, do you want to talk about the revisions that you'll be seeing before the final draft is prepared?
Sure, Sandy. So, after the tip was released, I went back and looked at the spreadsheet provided by John and Kat and released some formulas and so for that team before. So the table that's shown, or these tables that are shown on your screen now, those are the revised numbers. John has approved their summary, so I'll check back at their approval, and we'll give this update to the policy board. Other than that, I think there's one project where I think I mistook a 648 in terms of a funding amount, but those are the only adjustments that I'm aware of right now and what's currently before you.
So just so you all know about the process, this is a public plan that needs public engagement in order to be approved. So we will be following the required public engagement procedures, both in the federal regulations as well as in our publicly our MPO adopted public engagement plan. That means that we will post the draft tip on our website in April for the minimum 30-day comment period. We'll also make sure that we are sharing information that the tip is available for review by the public on our social media. And then we will be conducting the required public hearing at the MPO Policy Board meeting in May. And so at that point, at that May meeting, we'll be asking the policy board to take action on approving that plan. We'll be asking you all for a recommendation, either to approve the final draft of the plan as written, or to approve it with any specific revisions that you will identify. And then just because we approve the plan doesn't mean that we're done with it. Throughout the year or throughout the lifetime of this plan, there will be adjustments or amendments that might be needed. So we'll be bringing those back to you as necessary in order to make sure that any sorts of those changes are all processed. So any questions on the general purpose of the tip or on anything specific in the plan?
I do have a question on the adjustments that were made for Ted and John. If you go back to that slide. I noticed that, the CAT funding sort of seems to go in a curve. I'm wondering why the out years would be much lower. Like, are we anticipating a drop in federal funding for CAT?
Are you able to answer that, Javon?
I am not. So I know Ryan got this from Barry.
Yeah, okay. I'll follow up with Barry and see.
Might it have something to do with the Fair Free, how that's funded for several years and then it's not? Do you know what program that comes through?
Yeah, that's through a state funding source.
So not this.
So there is a drop in that state funding that could be part of it, but there's also, I'm seeing a drop in FTA 5339. And there's also one in 5307 that seems kind of surprising. So might want to follow up with Barry.
Thank you.
There are questions or comments?
Okay, hearing none, we move on to our next item, which another standing special, there's two additions to the FY 23 unified planning work program.
Sure, yeah, just to give you a little bit of background information. The Unified Planning Work Program is basically the work program that the MPO develops, communicating what it is that we are going to be undertaking with the funding that we are provided from FHWA and FTA, as well as the state agencies, to support the regional transportation coordination and planning work that we are tasked to provide for the region. 80% of our funding comes from federal sources, so that's FHWA and FTA, each give us an allocation every year, and then the state sources make up 10% of our budget, and then the local sources make up another 10%. In FY 2023, the budget for the MPO activities was a little over $500,000, but this was a little bit unique because it also included some rollover funding from fiscal years FY 21 and FY 22. And then the funding that you will see in the work programs also shows that there's a line item that's called VDOT SPR, that's VDOT State Planning and Research, which is an additional funding line item for VDOT to pay their staff to support the MPS program. So that funding does not come through our MPO. So what has happened in the last couple of years is that we have had some pretty significant changes in our staffing, which has caused a little bit of a lag in getting our staff up to date. And then there's also been some increases in the amount of funding that has been available for these different programs through the cost allocations. And so that's created this opportunity for us to use some of this for pass-through services instead of direct costs. So one of the things that we did with this rollover funding was that we retained a consultant to support us with the long-range transportation plan. There are two types of rollover funding. One of these is passive rollover. So any funding that we don't use this year, that we don't specifically say we want to use next year, will be considered a passive rollover, and that will show up again, not next year, but in 2 years. So if we don't spend down all our funding and we don't communicate back to the state and the federal agencies that we would like to have that funding available, we'll see it again in FY 25. Otherwise, in order to move some of this funding that's available that we don't anticipate using in FY 23 into FY 24, we have to go through a deobligation, which is what I'm going to be asking you all to do today. So there are 2 line items that we had identified up front, and when we approved the FY 23 Unified Planning Work Program that we knew probably would not be spent in FY 23. One of those was to support the 2050 Long Range Transportation Plan. So we retained a consultant knowing that some of those services would be provided in FY 23 and that some of those services would be provided in FY 24. So one of the deobligation requests is to roll over the expected balance of what our contract is with the consultants from what we expect to spend in FY 23 to what we so that we have it available in FY 24 to complete the planned work that we have already set in motion with them. So that amount is $72,643 that we would like to deliver for that specific line item. The rest of the funding in the amount of $32,357 that we are requesting for active rollover is in this on-call services category. What happened last year that some of you may recall is that after we had drafted our original Unified Planning Work Program, we got an updated cost allocation from VDOT that increased the amount of funding that we received, and we did not have planned activities for those. So we put those into an on-call services category in order to support other initiatives that might come up or determine what the best strategy will be for applying those funds to other programs in the future. So as anticipated, we did not spend all of this down. So we are also asking to roll over an additional $32,000 from that on-call services into FY 24 so that we can have that available. What I think is really important to note is that neither of these rollover requests are going to impact any planned activities that we have committed to completing this fiscal year. These are all things that were above and beyond or were anticipated would be rollover expenses from the get-go. So what I'm asking from you all today is for a recommendation on whether to approve this active rollover request, so that this $105,000 could be rolled over into our FY 24 Unified Planning Work Program, and then we'll be asking the policy board later this afternoon to approve the request to deallocate that funding. Any questions on that?
I hear a motion for providing a recommendation to roll over these active funds, in the obligation.
So moved.
Second. All right, all in favor say yea. All opposed say nay. Any other abstentions? All right, so,
Yeah.
all right, and the next one will be for Unified Planning Work Program and Sandy.
Now we get to look to the future. So looking into FY 24, we will be asking for an approval of our FY 24 work program at the policy board meeting also in May. So this is a chance to talk about what the identified tasks are from our staff that we plan to undertake in FY 24 to provide us with any comments or feedback on any adjustments or revisions that you might like to those for us to incorporate into the development of the final work program. So as I mentioned, the amount of new funding that is estimated that we will have available based on the VDOT cost allocation through that line item. This is $257,644. And then we did have a little bit of passive rollover from FY 22, and then assuming the policy board follows your recommendation and approves the active rollover of FY 23 funding, we'll have this additional $105,000. So that gives our total amount of funding for the PL, which is the FHWA VDOT side of the work program, at $387,000. And then we don't anticipate rolling over any of the funding from the FTA and DRPT side. So we'll have another $129,000, which is the cost allocation that we received for FY24 from them. So the VDOT SPR is estimated at this point that this won't affect the work program budget. It will just affect the final calculations that are in these documents with the final UPW is approved. So looking at what we have drafted as the tasks for the FY 24, a lot of these are pretty similar that we have as standard line items in our work program. So all of the administration tasks, the reporting and compliance with regulations, committee staffing and information sharing is pretty similar. I will note that we have added some additional funding to this information sharing line item because some of you may recall that we went through a comprehensive website update for the TJPDC 2020, 2021, 19, I don't know.
Academic year.
21, yeah. So this would be, we would like to go ahead and update the MPO website as well to be consistent in format and have some of the functionality that the PDC website also has. So that line item is a little bit higher than it normally is. For the big long-range transportation planning projects, we will be continuing our work on the long-range transportation plan. This comprehensive safety action plan item is intended to support the development of the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant. So this is funding for our staff to support those initiatives beyond what has already been identified as part of that grant. I also want to mention that one of the requirements from the FHWA is that at least 2.5% of our MPO planning funding needs to be dedicated to supporting complete streets initiatives. So the development of this comprehensive safety action plan also meets that requirement because we'll be looking at safety improvements to support the development of the multimodal network. We're hoping to complete this boundary analysis to evaluate whether or not there are changes that need to be processed for the MPO boundary in this fiscal year, but we are just now receiving information, or will be about to receive information from the state on that information. So it's likely that that work will need to continue into next year. As you all know, we have the ongoing transit governance study that is looking at what a potential oversight and funding opportunities are to support some of the transit initiatives that we've identified in our region. And then there are gonna be next steps after that to try to follow through and implement any of the recommendations that come out of that transit governance study. So this is generally intended to support the completion of that governance study, but also follow up with any next steps that may be needed. And we are also including funding for the comprehensive safety action plan, the transit governance initiatives. And this next item, the commuter assistance program strategic plan development, and both the MPO work program and the rural transportation work program. The commuter assistance program strategic plan is a requirement from DRPT for any of the commuter assistance programs throughout the state. So we have applied for a technical assistance grant, but this will also support the development of that plan. And then we will need to be working with VDOT on updating our regional travel demand model. The short range transportation planning are pretty much the same categories that we typically include in our work programs. That include maintaining the transportation improvement program, supporting smart scale, supporting multimodal system planning. So that's the regional transit partnership, travel demand management, and bike ped planning. And then processing the federal requirements like the performance targets. Any questions or feedback on the draft work program at this point for FY24?
Do the commuter assistance program and the travel demand model update to this one count towards the total? Or is this just one thing? Why is that? Why not different than the
Why is what item different? Oh, right here, yeah. They do count towards the total, that must just be a error, not in the table over here, yeah, my apologies. No.
Any other questions?
I don't know if this table specifically about it, but
It is.
yeah.
In there.
Anything else on the work program?
Then we will also be preparing a final draft of this once we receive feedback from the policy board as well, and then this will be an item for you all to make a recommendation on and for the policy board to approve as well today.
For our next item, moving toward 2050 updates with Sandy and Bruce.
So we were hoping that we would be able to go through a demonstration of what the prioritization process worked like, and I don't think we're quite at a point. We've had some other organizational priorities that we need to go through, but we do have some of the graphics to show what this process is going to look like that have been prepared by the consultant, so I can walk through that really quickly. We've been talking about this a lot in here, so I'm not going to go through in a lot of detail with the background information unless you all have questions about that. But we have completed the final report, I should say the consultants have completed the final report with the finalized methodology, and they have developed the geoprocessing tool that we're going to be using. So we are actively working. We have time scheduled where we are regularly meeting to work through just familiarizing ourselves with that tool and making sure that we understand the data inputs and how all of this works together. And we will continue to work through it, but we're not quite ready to go live with that yet. So this is just going to show kind of what the output or what the interface is going to look like. So you'll recall that we had these categories and we were developing these performance measures to help us identify where the system priorities are going to be. I don't have these compiled, so when you put them all together, you'll see a map like this that's going to show a compilation of all of the different system priorities that are kind of as they overlap with each other. So we have priorities for safety, we have priorities for congestion, we have priorities for access. We're going to put all of those together, and that's going to show where our network priorities are going to be. But it's a little bit premature to do that because part of what those outcomes are going to look like is dependent on how much weight we want to give to the different performance measures. And we haven't determined that yet until we go through some of the public engagement. But this will show you what the interface looks like. So every need category that we have is going to be standardized on a 1 to 7 point scale. And we're going to go through this analysis. And so where there's a network connection or an area that has a lot of really high needs, those are going to show up in break. And then the ones that might show up as system needs, but our very low priority will be the darker colors. So this one just shows the roadway safety needs. This is the pedestrian safety needs. We'll have some decisions to make on which of these thresholds, and you may recall when we look at it at the report that was included in your packet, there are different ways that we can measure these. So for pedestrian safety needs, we can either look at the district top 1% of identified corridors where there are safety needs, or we could look at the district top 5%, I believe, for the two thresholds. So we'll need to make some decisions, and we'll work through that at future meetings. But this is just sort of to give you all a sense of what the interface will look like. The access to jobs need, and I think one of the questions we had that has come up a lot that I probably have a better answer for is the difference between the access category and the land use category. And specifically, if you look through the report, the access is really helping understand how people are already trying to get to work, which, and work in this case is kind of a proxy of how people are trying to get where they need to go. But it's really looking at moving people from where they are to where they want to be and determining where there are opportunities to improve access. The land use evaluation, when you look in the report, is really focused on connecting non-work destinations together. So creating really strong network connections where there are important community destinations that aren't necessarily related to employment. So there's a little bit of a distinction, but I would say the land use is really more about connecting the destination points together versus connecting people to where they're trying to go. So that's something we'll need to continue to work to communicate. But really, I just wanted to bring this back to you all to sort of show you what the interface would look like, because I know that was a question. If there's anything specific you want to look at, I'm happy to do that. But otherwise, I would say that our next steps are really to focus on conducting the public engagement, and then we'll spend some time working through which of the thresholds we want to select, and then we'll start putting all of this together. Yeah, was there a question? Okay.
So we have also gone through a similar process in the city. I think we were working the same thing actually. So I'm curious if they have given you, if they have shown you how the prioritization works out using the different thresholds and metrics. If they've given you any sort of like sensitivity analysis.
If you look in that report, not necessarily sensitivity analysis, but what they did was they sort of showed what the different thresholds would prioritize if you use one threshold versus another. Yeah, so there is some framing to it, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Do these two efforts work together? Insofar as the same people were working on it. But they don't integrate. Not necessarily. I mean, the priorities for the region probably are a little bit different than what the priorities are specifically for the city. So there's going to be a difference there. But can we at least like on the same map so we'll be able to look and see what your priorities are, what their priorities are?
I don't know that the methodology is necessarily the same, but I think we could take the information that's produced from a map and overlay them. Yeah. I mean, there's nothing that would prevent us from doing that. Yeah.
Any other questions on?
Yeah, I've got a couple if you don't mind. One, I noticed, you know, it's a long report, kind of hard to be on piece of paper or on a computer. But identifying recreational trails are, well, anything's not shared use path associated with roadway. It's not assessed as part of this, because it's deemed as recreational trail.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that, does that mean that we're not looking for bike ped accommodations through shared use paths associated with roadway?
The model is pretty limited to what the roadway improvements are, but I think that's going to come up in the land use requirements. And I think that other thing that we're really evaluating, I mean, you're just not going to see a lot of these metrics that apply to the bike ped projects, for example, like the safety issues probably won't show up as a bike ped project. I think for the bike ped projects, those are something that we're going to have to pull out separately, that we're just going to have to say may not be captured in this process, and consider those outside of this process.
So it's sort of what we're gonna have to do a discussion about how that gets integrated.
Yeah, I don't know if that's going to happen in the same process, but I think that that's something that as a region and as the continued planning work that we're doing, I think that's something that we're going to have to be having conversations of. It just might not be part of this long range transportation plan process, yeah.
So, also, this is actually the first time I'm getting to see the images, what's coming out of this thing. So it's harder to have a conversation about, so being able to digest some of that stuff, before the meeting. Is this gonna be available to the technical committee to look at this tool?
Well, we haven't started working at the tool, on the tool yet.
But we.
Are these like still-
Yeah, these are just.
On what thresholds the analysis would be, I mean, you've gone and set up a whole series of variables that will be part of the analysis. So it's just be interesting to see how those variables play out in a little more depth. Or is this that, we don't have any choices. Let's follow.
No. The thresholds were provided to us as recommendations by OIB. We haven't made any decisions about this. They have provided us with some options and recommendations on those, but I haven't made any decisions. This is something that I'll be bringing back to you all to help walk through, how do we make these decisions and which of these do we want to use?
But this is the
For
tool.
weighting the categories.
For weighting the categories and also which of the different thresholds that they've developed do we want to apply? Like, do we want to use the 1% or do we want to use the 5%? We haven't made any decisions around that yet. That's something that will happen in a future phase.
Fair enough. Pick which variable we have, we've been given to do our assessment on. But to assess what the variables are. I mean, you can look at what the information is and understand the information that you're looking at. I mean, what I have is, I've read a guide here that basically talks about what variables you picked, what methodology you're picking those. I don't really understand the data that's going into there, and I don't really understand how the data plays out. I'm looking at the images right now, I'll see slides, but it's hard to sort of like,
What do you wanna do? Do you wanna
I'd like to understand a little more about what's going
like
on.
play with the tool itself as a VDOT person?
Well,
Do you wanna get in and like manipulate?
I wouldn't say manipulate, I just don't understand. I've been, quite honestly, I've been interested in this process, both the city and the county, since you all embarked on this. I've been interested in what's going on. This is the first chance, getting a chance to see it. It seems like we're at the end of the process, or at least as part of developing the tool. So I'd like to at least be able to look at the tool, you know.
We haven't had a lot of experience using the tool. I mean, we're just now using the tool too. We haven't had this tool to work with, so. The information that I've had, I've shared with you all, which is what is the process that we're going to use to develop the tool? They developed the tool and now we have the tool that we're working through. So the information that I've had, I've been bringing back to you all so that you all are hearing about it as we go and are informing the decision making. So, yeah, I mean, we'll continue to have these conversations.
How big was the staff of this? It's like, okay, so you just said you've got a tool you developed. And here's the tool, we're gonna use the tool. But in the creation of the tool, I haven't been able to watch what happened. I don't understand the sausage that went in, what went in the sausage making here? I've got a report here that's got a very long report, it's got variables in it. But, you know, it's hard to sort of understand how that plays out, without looking at, you got GIS platform, be nice. I don't know, maybe I'm the only one who's interested in sort of learn a little bit more about the tools, so eventually make decisions out. I'd like to be able to play with it a little bit and look at it, see how it comes out in GIS.
Okay.
And if it's not the time to do that, and we have to wait some more, you have to wait, but I'd like to be able to see what this thing is and what it does.
And what I'm telling you right now, we're not trying to, I mean, I don't see why that's a problem. What I'm telling you right now, though, is that we haven't worked through the functionality of that yet ourselves. So before we can sort of walk through anybody else using it, we have to make sure that we understand how the data feeds into it and making sure that the tool is set up and that kind of thing. So we're working through all that process right now.
The discussion of what the different variables will do that we were talking about earlier is that. Okay, so that might actually help figure out how it is working. And the variables, just to be clear, these are related to the performance measures that we talked about back in November. Included during correspondence.
Yes.
Yep.
concern, and so what we're looking at here is kind of, current state. Is that what these maps are showing us?
They are showing the current state, so that was one discussion that we had, was whether or not how much we wanted to depend on the model to sort of, go through this assessment.
Right, so just in terms of the formulation of the tool and how you implement the tool, so is it gonna have the functionality so as we begin to change developments or comprehensive plans or how we're gonna densify, or is this tool gonna help to do that and evaluate the networks, the walkability and so I guess what are the functionalities it's gonna have for projecting and assessing changes that we see coming through the comprehensive plan and other development?
Probably, it's not probably going to be that, robust as far as being able to use it for modeling purposes. So this is really capturing where the needs are based on the existing system, with a couple of exceptions. One of those is that I believe it's the access to non-work destinations has a function that's based on the population growth. But this is not modeling new changes. It's not based on growth projections. It's based on existing system operations for the large part. And the reason why we talked about that is we had this discussion, is that it makes sense that if there are identified system needs right now, it makes sense to focus on those. And then when we get to the point where we're developing what the right project is to address those, that's when we start looking at what is the right project to address the existing need, not just right now, but for the future. And that's where we would look more at kind of the population projection.
So it's really just focused on, here's some problem areas and let's prioritize where we're gonna spend the money, but it seems like it shouldn't be that much of a stretch to make it into a projection tool where then you can see, well, what is going to be happening and what are the impacts of densifying certain areas of zoning changes that we're working through right now. And it doesn't seem like that's too big of a stretch for a tool that's already capturing.
That's not.
And your tool do that? No.
It's not robust.
Say that to that point, Louise, we are also going to use the regional transit model to look at this, but what the regional transit model is going to capture is mostly congestion based on the growth projections. It's not going to capture a lot of these other system analyses. So we'll be able to see what the model says and kind of use that as a way to evaluate against what this is showing as our priorities, and that may inform some of the decisions we make. So it's not built into this process, but will be part of the long-term transportation plan evaluation. Yeah. Any other questions?
I think we can move along to smart scale round 6.
Actually, there's another part of the long-range transportation plan.
Oh, there is.
Yeah. Yeah, so just to go through and give you all a little bit of an update, as you remember, we talked about holding some stakeholder discussion groups to provide a first level review of the goals and objectives that we had drafted. And so we were able to schedule 3 different meetings with the business community, and then we had a meeting with the public safety personnel, and then we had a meeting with community partners. And we prepared a technical memo that was included in your packets that just explains a little bit about what we heard from those and what suggested changes that we think that should be made. And I don't think we're 100% know the way there based on some feedback we heard from CTAC, but we'll get there. The purpose of the stakeholder feedback was to inform how the information will be presented to the broader public, to revise some of the language around the goals and objectives, and then make any changes to how the goals and objectives are categorized, or whether or not we needed to add or remove any of them. So this is just the summary of the original draft goals. You might recall: safety, environment, equity and accessibility, land use and economic development, and efficiency. So one of the most important or significant changes is that I think going forward, we would like to really take a much comprehensive view of 2 key priorities that have been identified both at the federal level and at the local level, and making sure that it's clear that those are being integrated within the development of the other goals and objectives, and that's related to the climate action initiatives and equity. As we were looking at how to evaluate the different system priorities, it became really clear that the climate action initiatives was not really just about measuring one performance measure related to emissions reduction, but really but it was really showing up in a lot of different places. How do we make bike ped infrastructure more comfortable and safe and create felt safety for those? How do we improve accessibility related to alternative modes of transportation? How do we support transportation that supports efficient land use, those kinds of things? So climate action and equity were both major concerns that were showing up throughout the evaluation of the different goals and objectives. So I realize that it's not as clear as it needs to be in the memo, but I wanted to make sure that I highlighted that we are not removing the importance of climate action or equity from the goals and objectives, but instead we are saying these are so important that these need to be considered throughout. So the safety, there weren't a lot of changes to the goal itself, but the red lines show where there are suggested changes from what was originally presented to you all related to any of the changes in the goals and objectives. So we talked about the original language of reducing the frequency and severity of crashes, but thought that after thinking about it a little bit more, it's not necessarily the frequency of crashes themselves that are concerning when it comes to safety, but it's really about how seriously injured or impacted people are from those crashes. That is really what we're trying to achieve when we talk about safety. So we changed this to reducing the frequency of serious injury and fatal crashes. And then there's also a lot of feedback from the stakeholder groups that they didn't really like the terminology for alternative modes of transportation. They thought that made active transportation and transit feel secondary to single occupancy vehicles. So we tried to change how we were referring to the multimodal transportation system and not using those alternative modes to sort of confirm the primary importance of single occupancy vehicles. So the first bullet kind of focuses a little bit more on maybe the vehicular impacts, and the second bullet, while it refers to multimodal transportation system, has a little bit more emphasis on the transit and active transportation. All right, for the environment, as we talked about, some of these objectives were really kind of redundant because we're talking about improving multimodal transportation opportunities throughout the goals and objectives, and then we were talking about reducing vehicle emissions. That's going to come up later when we also talk about system efficiency and reducing congestion. And so we took those two bullets out of this, and this is really focused more on managing the physical impacts of the transportation system on the natural and built environment. This one is probably the one that looks a little bit concerning if we don't make sure that we're really understanding that we're using this equity framework approach. But really, like I said, we're trying to say that we don't want to call equity out specifically in any of these categories because we want equity to be considered throughout the categories. So so we changed accessibility to improving access through greater availability of mode choices that are affordable and efficient. And we specifically removed 2 jobs and opportunities because that was another piece of feedback that we kept getting over and over in the stakeholder groups, is that there's too much emphasis on jobs and economic opportunities, and they really wanted this to be more about general access to any destination that is important for a member of the community. And then we're focusing on increasing road choices as part of that accessibility. We're evaluating for the different road choices that people would have. The land use and economic development is probably one that we need to continue to work on. We are trying to really communicate that we wanted to help support the development of an efficient transportation system that supported land use that would help people limit the types of environmental impacts and really start connecting some of these community destinations together well, so that people could use a variety of modes in order to get from one place to another within, the designated growth areas. So I think there's still some confusion around this one, but if you all have any questions or feedback on it, I'm certainly open to suggestions on how this one can be more clearly communicated to the public. And then the last one was about efficiency. I think there were some qualifiers in here that felt like it was a little bit different from the others, so we tried to remove those to be a little bit more consistent as far as the style, that improving roadway system reliability through operational improvements, increase system capacity at identified bottlenecks. And then we moved the fill bicycle and pedestrian connectivity gaps because it felt like efficiency for a active transportation user would mean that there's consistency in the network that they were using. And while this will not be an evaluation, also maintaining the existing system in a state of good repair feels like it should be part of the efficiency considerations. Any questions or feedback on any of these?
On one of them, you cut out the transit element of it, and then I kind of thought it would show up somewhere else. I thought it might show up in that efficiency movement there, but.
We cut out the transit.
One more. I think it's the increase the use of alternative modes of transportation is what I was thinking.
Yeah, the reason we did that is because there's so much language about the multimodal system that was like integrated throughout. It felt a little bit redundant, but if you all feel like that's not clearly communicated, we could certainly add it back in.
Can we go back to the efficiency one and we can see how that works?
Yeah.
I guess the system capacity and state of good repair kind of cover what we would do with transit anyway, so.
We could add, something that makes sense for all nodes somewhere, or something like that.
So for us saying intersection reconfiguration, that kind of stuff, do we have like an idea of what else you mean by operational improvements?
What I mean by operational improvements is intersection reconfiguration, traffic light coordination, et cetera. That was the only one that sort of had an explanation attached to it.
I mean, give us some spit on instead.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was more about having consistency in style.
Any other questions on stakeholder discussion for each item? You can move on to smart scale item 6.
Sure. All right. So I think, again, everybody probably is pretty familiar with this, but smart scale is the big state process that we use to get funding for infrastructure projects, and round 6 applications will be submitted in August 2024. Under the current process, the MPO can submit up to 4 projects, just like each of our localities, as well as the TJPDC. I think one of the caveats is that this process is also under a state of evolution. So we don't know what new requirements there might be for the next round yet, but as far as we know at this point, we have 4 projects that we could potentially submit. In order for projects to be submitted through Smart Scale, they must meet eligibility requirements. So the first one means that they have to meet a need that has been identified through the statewide transportation plan, which is referred to as VTrans. And then for the MPO projects, it's a little bit different than the localities. The 2 types of projects that the MPO is eligible to submit are projects that support improvements on corridors of statewide significance, or projects that are identified as being part of our regional network.
So you can't submit on a urban development area project.
If that's the only VTrans paper, I don't submit it. So one of the things that we do is we typically will coordinate with the localities to figure out what the overall projects are and who is eligible to submit what kind of project. In the previous round 5, we implemented a new process to support the development of applications early. So we selected the projects that we wanted to move forward pretty early. We identified projects that needed some additional support to prepare for applications. So you might recall we did a lot of work on the River River Head Bridge. And then we did that public engagement in time to develop a scope that we used to submit the project application. So for round 6, I think we still want to identify our project priorities early and determine the projects that may need additional development prior to the application submission. However, there are a couple of things that are a little bit different for round six going in. And one of those is that the projects are in a different phase of development. What this means is that we, in the 2045 long range transportation plan, we had a list of high priority projects that we refer to as being on the constraint list. And we don't have a long list of outstanding projects that have been developed through previous planning initiatives that have not already been submitted. So we kind of had this list queued up. These are the priority projects that we hope to get implemented. We've worked through applying for a lot of those, and we don't have a long list of projects that haven't been through some level of application at this point. So we are currently working on developing our new queued up list of projects that we want to move forward, but we're not at a stage where we have those ready to go, ready to move forward as part of as part of this next phase of project development.
And what process is that?
What?
Which process is that?
Developing a new list of
Can
projects.
you go into a process?
With the long range transportation plan and that, yeah.
Just make sure. That you say, oh, okay.
No, I mean, there are a couple of different initiatives that are listed up there. So there's a long range transportation plan, there's the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant, there's the VDOT pipeline projects, we'll talk about those in a minute. And then the localities have their projects that they're working through as well. And all of this will feed into sort of developing a list of potential projects that we would want to move forward.
Thank you for.
Yeah, so we're working on keeping up that list again, but that's not already established yet. And then the other difference is that for the projects that we already have that have remained unfunded, that have been identified as priorities initially, need a different type of support. So it's not necessarily the public engagement that's needed, but some additional support as far as scoping the project and doing some more of the technical development work on these projects in order to make those a little bit stronger for future rounds. So one of the things that we did was we reviewed the unfunded projects for rounds 4 and 5 of SMART scale, and this shows the list in this top category right here. Just looking at what projects might make sense to consider for resubmission for this next round, because these are projects that have been identified as high priorities for our region. The two projects that are shown in black here, the others are grayed out, are the ones that probably have the most opportunity or remain the highest priority to move forward at this point. The District Avenue roundabout at Hydraulic Road has been identified as really high priority, and it actually scored pretty well in the last round of SMART scale. It was kind of a little bit of a fluke because it was submitted by the MPO and scored better than some of the other projects that were funded out of the district funding pool versus the statewide pool. So there's probably not a lot that needs to be done for that project to remain competitive in future rounds, and hopefully, you know, part of it would depend on what the other project submissions were in that round. So it makes sense to go ahead and keep resubmitting that project in the next round.
Can I ask a question like the obvious everybody else? Is there a benefit to that project being submitted by the jurisdiction and not at the MPO in order to score for the state funds? For the other, you know, you said the two different for the district.
Do you want to say anything about that, Jessica?
Yeah, I think you're totally right, Christine. The idea is that that the county would most likely submit this project next time.
Yeah. And then the Fifth Street project that the MPO submitted did not score very well, but it is an important project because there are a lot of safety concerns on this street specifically. So this is one where there might be a good opportunity to work with VDOT to look at what kind of adjustments we might be able to make to the scope initially and pull out pieces of that might be able to reduce the project costs in order for that to score better. So that's one that we might want to also put a little bit more time and effort into evaluating to determine if that remains a high priority and if it's something we want to work on for a round 6 application. And then VDOT also has 2 pipeline projects that they're initiating, which is 2 projects that impact US 250, so that's US 250 in Barrowshire, and then Ivy Road that includes the US 250 interchange. And I apologize that these graphics did not make it into your packet, but they have provided a couple of one-pagers. Chuck or Michael, do either of you want to review the pipeline projects and the scopes?
For Chuck.
If there's any questions, I mean, we're gonna basically look at, this is Barracks Road. This was submitted in round 3, I think, by the MPO. We're gonna relook at it as part of the pipeline process. And then and hopefully we can get it resubmitted to look at bike and pedestrian facilities from Georgetown all the way into the city, as well as making some improvements at the interchange to better improve the functionality. I know we've got queuing in the northbound off ramp that's backing out onto 250 that we want to try to address. But basically, that's what we're going to try to do with this project. As you can see, there's a lot of needs along this corridor, both for pedestrian and transit, as well as capacity preservation. So we want to try to get all those needs, at least identify what improvements need to be made so that we can provide them for the county or the MPO to submit as future applications in smart scale.
So I got a little trigger happy, Chuck. I can move on to the Ivy Road project.
Yeah, this is the other one. We've had a lot of issues going on here. I know that traffic engineering was looking at the old Ivy Road portion with the ramps and stuff on that north quadrant of the project, but we're going to focus mainly on the interchange and south and the 250 corridor. We did a STAR study a number of years ago, but we really haven't implemented any of those recommendations. So we're going to reevaluate that section. And we're also want to look at what we ultimately need to do at this interchange. In previous long range plan updates, this has come up as a possible concern, this corridor of 250, 29 and 250, because of the capacity constraints that it has. And there's a lot of issues with this interchange. The bridge is too short, so we can't extend the acceleration and deceleration lanes for the partial cloverleaf. So we want to try to look at how we can improve that and what the ultimate solution needs to be here to address all of the future needs at this location. The county has also expressed some concerns about the section south of the interchange, and that's why we included it, because of the median's really narrow and it tends to flood and cause safety hazards along that portion of the road. So we definitely want to look at that too. So basically, these are getting ready to start probably in April sometime, and we will be having stakeholders groups, meetings, as well as asking for public input as these move forward. So more to come. Any questions?
I have a question. Chuck, can you clarify whether or not this pipeline project includes the eastern end of Old Ivy where it goes under the railroad underpass? It goes under the railroad.
It runs from St. Anne's, which basically the city line in the east. It does include that intersection, but we weren't really necessarily looking at Old Ivy Road per se, but we're going to probably end up looking at it and discussing it as part of the scope, because traffic engineering already did that study there already. We could look at that underpass to see, but we're definitely going to look at the intersection at 250.
Yeah.
And again, this is going to include your transit and bike accommodations too as part of this process. I know it shows up as the VTrans needs are listed there, and it doesn't list all of them. I listed only the highest ones, but there are needs for transit as well as bike and pedestrian. So we're going to look at that along the entire corridor also of 250.
So really, I think at this point, we're talking about what we need to do to prepare to have strong applications for Round 6 and Smart Scale. And the recommendation that I think makes sense the most is that we support the development as the MPO, given that we have a lot of these other initiatives that are underway where our staff is going to be putting a lot of the time, is that our capacity is going to be directed towards further developing projects that have already been identified and supporting the VDOT pipeline projects, unless there are other initiatives that you all identify that you want us to consider for project development at this phase. So this is really just to sort of give you a background of what we think might make the most sense, but happy to hear any feedback from you all as well.
Well, so this list with the grayed out ones, those are ones that have been considered in the past that you're not recommending.
That we move forward with at this point, yeah.
I mean, only because the Rivanna Bridge, you know, there's been so much talk around it.
Mhm.
And this idea that maybe one of the reasons it didn't score well is because there was such a wide range of costs, and if those costs kind of like came closer together or something that was more realistic.
Yep, all of that submitted a US DOT raise grant to try to do the preliminary engineering phase in order to try to.
That may come back.
Yeah,
It's not off the list, it just wouldn't be competitive when we submit the same one, knowing the cost is so high.
Understood. Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to.
maybe I should put like an asterisk beside that one.
Reviewing the.
So we wouldn't be ready to go.
So.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay.
Are there other
And then
projects?
if we're awarded the raise grant and we get to that point, we can also consider whether smart scale or raise is the appropriate funding mechanism.
Yeah.
Or-
Are there other projects that fall into the category where there is some additional work that's being done in order to submit? So, are the other ones really just falling on?
Well, I think that the Hillsdale South extension was also part of the US 29 bundle, and I think the challenge with that one is that it involves a lot of right-of-way acquisition. It's a really expensive project, and I think there might be some benefit in waiting to reevaluate the broader area before we move forward with doing anything else. Just to provide some background, the Hillsdale South extension was intended to provide an extension of Hillsdale from the hydraulic road intersection south all the way to 250. So that was just an expensive project, and I don't know that there are a lot of opportunities to reduce the scope of that enough to get the budget to a place where it would be competitive. And there were still some, you know, Chuck or Michael, feel free to jump in, but I think there are still some outstanding issues that while this would provide some benefits, it wouldn't necessarily resolve all of the issues in that area.
Yeah, it will close some of the ramps at the current interchange on 250. They will be relocated, mainly the eastbound off ramp and the westbound on ramp. At least from part of it, that loop ramp coming out of the city. So the northbound to westbound movement will be relocated. So those ramps would be closed and relocated to this new location. Which could provide right away for redevelopment. But we would have to make improvements to Holiday, as well as building the extension between the Kroger's and the old Dominion Power site, which is going to be requiring right away, and figuring out how to work the trucks deliveries for Kroger's was a question that came up several times. But it would connect to the roundabout that's already funded for the hydraulic 29 interchange or hydraulic Hillsdale interchange. So that was all part of it. It would include bike and pedestrian facilities along it down to not necessarily 250, but at least to Holiday, and probably connect over to the existing facilities that are coming along 250 on the north side from hydraulic. But like, Sandy said, there's a lot of right-of-way purchase, so it drives up the cost. And with the current state of right-of-way, it would even be higher than what we actually submitted it for last time. So it's significantly higher. So, and that was some of the questions that came up when we submitted it before. So that's why we wanted to hold off until we started looking at the corridor a little bit more. I know we're probably going to have to look at 29 North again at some point. So those are all going to come back, and this may be something we might want to consider at that point.
I have two questions. For the Fifth Street extended, one of the recommendations is to look at potentially rescoping that. In a rescoping, can you submit two different applications for whatever is rescoped? So if you did like intersection improvements in one and bike ped in the other, can you submit both of those applications?
I believe you can, you Chuck, you just couldn't necessarily put them in different applications of the scopes or different cycles of the scopes overlap, correct?
As long as they're not relying on each other, like you couldn't include the road improvements and then those would facilitate the bike improvements, because you got to make sure they're a standalone project.
Yeah. And then the other question was, can you say more about the Rolton Road one?
The Broken
I
Road,
just don't remember.
yeah, that was
Then
the,
that scored 3.91, and its benefit score was only 4.66.
yeah, that was one that the TJPDC submitted that was really developed kind of, as part of that pipeline project. And I think if that remains something that, you know, especially the county is supportive of, it might make sense for us to resubmit that. I think we're kind of, that was a TJPDC submitted project, not an MPO submitted project, so those are typically what we use to support requests from the additional localities. But it could be resubmitted. Not to put Alamo on the spot.
Hey, Sandy, the only other thing I would want to point out is we do have that 29 North corridor study that you may want to consider also. I don't know if there's anything in it the county or the MPO would like to consider moving forward. I know we looked at Frays Mill, Burley Station again, but if you didn't want to submit that one there, the thing down at Ravenna Station, there may be some opportunities there for improvements because that's a really high priority for the state.
Okay.
Thanks, Chuck.
Do me a favor, please, the back one slide. Cool, thanks. All right, any other questions on the smart scale round 6 memo? All right, we move along to roundtable updates, and we'll start with MPO staff. Updates beyond what is on our agenda today. Okay, cool.
I'll let the Safe Streets and Roads for All, we're in the stage now, and we're reaching out to each of our local governments to schedule a scoping meeting to make sure that they understand the scope and have the input that they need within the bounds of what we were funded to do, and then we'll be looking to develop the RFP, so we have that ready to go once we get under contract.
Awesome, thank you for the reminder. So I'll start with the city of Charlottesville update, and I'll steal into the past thunder to start before I hand it off to Juan. We are currently undergoing our alternative fuels feasibility study to see how we might move the CAT from diesel to electric, battery, CNG maybe, hydrogen maybe. So we are currently working through a bunch of different scenarios and different fuel types and different transition plans to see what the capital and operating costs associated with those would be, as well as what the emissions impact would be, presumably reductions in emissions. Our consultant working through sort of the hard math, and we'll be taking that out to stakeholders in the next month to get their feedback on the analysis. We also interviewed consultants last week to start our transit strategic plan for CAT. This is a state requirement for larger transit agencies around the state that they put together a transit strategic plan, basically saying this is how we plan on spending the state's money. So we'll have to have that done by, I believe, December is the date. So it's going to be a quick turnaround for us. We're going to be relying really heavily on the system optimization plan that CAT completed in 2021, as well as the regional transit study, regional transit vision plan. Our Save Russell School program is sort of shifting from looking at more infrastructure improvements that they could implement to help kids get to school safely to more programmatic things. So you may be seeing some events pop up in the next month or so. We had one this past week that was a bike repair workshop over here at Friendship Court, and next week we'll be having our bike repair party for city schools, which is basically we take all of the bikes in the city schools at home, bring them all to Three Notch Brewing over here, and have a party repairing these little bikes for kids. Free beer, bring your own tools. It's a lot of fun.
Do you happen to have fixed bikes?
Well, there it is.
You bet.
As we talked a little bit earlier, we are looking for non-motorized prioritization process. So bike and pedestrian infrastructure, hard infrastructure, not paint dollars, but actually concrete, some paint for bike lanes. But we have worked through the quantitative element of it, looking at all of these different variables, and now we're looking at it sort of qualitatively and looking through project by project to see if what came out of that quantitative analysis makes sense, and to make sure that the projects that we're recommending are actually feasible and that we can do them in sort of a quicker timeline. Because a lot of these projects have been on our priorities list since 2015. So we kind of want to see if there's a timeline for actually getting something done. So that's what we're looking at this month, and we'll be working with stakeholders in the next couple months to vet those priorities as well. We are currently under legal review for the changes to our dockless permit program, so our scooters. We have been working with the vendor for the past few months to iron out how we might need to change some of our regulations, to make things a little more flexible for them and to make them more fit and responsive to us in terms of safety and parking issues that we face. Pretty sure we're gonna get to this legal review okay, and then get those regulations passed, and then the vendor will have to apply for a new permit, in which they will have to do some things that they haven't been doing in the past few years. That permit will be managed by our new plant type coordinator, which I hope to have in place next month. We are wrapping up interviews for that right now. So hopefully next month we'll have both new regulations for our scooters and someone to manage them at the same time. So very excited about next month. More fun updates to share. I'll pass it on to the county next. What do you guys got?
Yeah, let's see, we've been working on some early conceptual design studies, to help us get better cost estimates for future projects. So we are wrapping up our Free Bridge Lane, early conceptual design project, and we got board approval to plan a pilot program to turn Free Bridge Lane, into a promenade. So we are working on planning a pilot program right now. Today, we are kicking off our Route 20 shared use path conceptual design project. So we are revisiting a previous MPO project to look at the potential for a shared use path along Route 20 from the city to like Dairy Barn Road. And we'll be doing a site visit today, and we're having a stakeholder meeting that includes the MPO, the city, and other stakeholders at the end of the month to really kick that off. Coming up in early April, we'll give our quarterly report for transportation projects, and Alberic will give his first presentation ever in front of the board on the secondary 6-year plan. Did you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, so, we wrapped that up so that that workforce not going through the whatever channels of hierarchy and accounting that has to go through. So that'll be going to the board, I guess, in May now or late April.
We will talk to the board on
Yeah.
April 5th, and go over some of the roads that are going to be paved as part of the.
So we didn't.
It's going to be April.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then, yeah, but, okay, and then, we also are working on updating our transportation project priorities, but that's something that we're gonna have to tackle probably in the next few weeks and months to get that done, so we know kind of the framework of what projects we wanna, work on the most. And then anything else? Basically, just having fun, I guess.
Can I have a question? You said to Dairy Barn Road, where did it start? The shared use path, right, on 20?
At the city county line, so Quarry Road is where the current bike lane's in.
Thank you.
We done.
Chuck, you wanna go first?
Sure. We've got the pipeline studies, which we talked about earlier. We also have some STAR studies going on. Michael's working with the localities on their project selection for the STAR TAP and revenue share. We're also looking at gearing up for the next round of smart scale, which basically we're trying to work on that so we can bring it out to localities this late spring, early summer. And that's pretty much it, helping with all these updates that the MPO is working on also. So.
Yeah, I just mentioned the project selection process piece. We'll talk with you all. I guess we gave that presentation back in January. It's going very well. We're working on 8 projects with most of the localities in the northern part of the district. We've gone to the site visits. We've done preliminary alignments that we're going to be giving back to the localities probably next week. We vetted all of those issues with some folks internal to VDOT. And it's been great because one of the nice things about it is several of the folks in Falk here in Green County, they were like, great to be on a site visit with road engineers and see how they look at the issues that happen in the field. So kind of a good way to help develop projects. We'll be working, of course, moving that towards, better conceptual plans and estimates prior to the application. Again, we'd love to be able to work with you all, to help shape your projects, and help do them in the lens of not just planning, but sort of engineering component, try to create that iterative back and forth between the planners and the engineers, as it may work well for you all and the projects you all are doing. I think the last thing to say is smart scale, like Chuck said, we're working on some of the safety stuff, but we hope to extend the same process to, smart scale applications, especially ones that are more, in these urban areas where it's a little trickier to, deal with a whole series of competing, engineering issues, conflicting ones at times and planning, issues. So very excited about the process, and, hopefully we'll be, having some both good conceptual plans and the scope narrative documents to really tie together those planning and engineering elements. Later this summer, we will see what we've done elsewhere. Maybe it'll appeal to localities and some of our districts as well.
Actually, one thing I forgot, the county, we have a safe versus school kind of like walkabout happening for Woodbrook Elementary, April 17th. So we're gonna kind of walk around VDOT and kind of identify, I guess, transportation issues that kids face trying to walk or bike to school. So that'd be something that, will eventually give us a report that we can use to kind of, think about different parts we're gonna focus on for them.
But if you could, I don't even talk, in the residency office. Have you come on that walkabout, you have to come and site visits, still site visits.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it's the safe versus school wing of VDOT that'll be there as well, so.
Which is the TAP grant stuff.
Yeah,
So. Sounds like a good thing to like.
yeah, it's a new, information.
Sure.
Do we have anybody from, DRPT online?
No, but that reminds me that Wood Hudson is no longer our representative for DRPC because he is moving to be the manager of the new Trails program. So that's part of the TMPD office, I believe. But Tiffany Dubinsky will be joining us as she's able until they find her this month for Wood.
Great. Juan, do you have any updates for Kat beyond what I've provided?
Well, now that you stole all mine. The microtransit is out there, so Cat is put an RFP out for microtransit service, and that is currently on out in the wild. So hopefully we'll get some good bites on that. I had a chance to talk to Barry and get a clarification on those TIP funding decline, and that's due to the ARPA and CARES funding going away, and so that all comes through the 5307. That's why you see the numbers dip there. And the capital 5339, that's rolling stock, so we are near future buying a lot, but I guess by 27 that's gonna dry out a bit, and hopefully we won't have to do big bus purchases for a while. But other than that, I think you covered all the other stuff.
Sounds good. Anybody from John online? John, thanks up there.
Yeah, just a couple of things. I guess I think it's on April 1st, there's a new director of business services starting. Coretta Harris is from Grandview University, I think, in Michigan. So she'll be overseeing the Department of Transportation department, amongst them. Previously, that was Rich Kovach. Another thing I just wanted to mention was, you may have seen, I've seen a news article about it. There was a sustainability competition at UVA where faculty and staff could submit ideas for good ideas towards sustainability, and the winners were one of the winning groups was actually transportation related. Patrick Clark, who works at PNT, and Ethan Keel, who works in the sustainability office. They put together a proposal for what they call a Commute Club, and it's kind of like a rewards program for faculty and staff who take alternative roads transportation to UVA. And, you know, it seemed like a great idea and, you know, on the face of it, but there's a lot of details that need to work out. So they received $100,000 to kind of pilot this program. And so that'll help kind of, you know, create an application essentially and a methodology to how you give these rewards to people who make the right choice. So that should be rolling out over the course of the next 6 months to a year. They already have some ideas on like where how they want to pilot it. That's some technology solutions that are out there. So it's just together. You never.
Not least,
Yeah, just a couple of quick updates. As Sandy had mentioned, we, in addition to submitting our operating grant to DRPT, also applied for the technical assistance grant to complete a strategic plan. We are rolling into a busy spring with Bike Month coming up in May, as well as some more initiatives and advertising devoted to Earth Month and clean commuting, which you'll probably start to see shortly. And then briefly, Afton Express, of course, has launched their expanded service that started in February. And I do have February numbers. They have still been averaging right about 58 passengers a day for the month. So I've definitely seen good improvement there. UVA offered a really lovely promotion for their employees to buy passes and fare cards, and they saw really great results from that. So we're looking at possibly implementing some additional strategies and doing that again as next year's academic year will roll back around, since it was so well received. But so far, everything is looking good with Afton Express.
awesome, great to hear. And that's all the updates that we have today. Any matters from the public? All right. Hearing none, I guess we can adjourn. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for taking on the.